He accused her of betrayal and walked away. 5 years later, he saw her again, holding the son who had his eyes. The corridor of the hospital was filled with the sterile scent of disinfectant, the low hum of fluorescent lights, and the muffled sounds of hurried footsteps. Catherine stood there, her body trembling, her eyes red from tears she had been holding back for too long. She had been waiting for Alex to arrive, clinging to the faint hope that he would understand, that he would believe her, that love was stronger than whispers and accusations. But when he finally appeared at the end of the hall, dressed in his tailored suit, his dark hair perfectly in place and his blue eyes colder than she had ever seen them, she realized that hope was already slipping through her fingers. He did not rush to her side or take her hands the way he used to in moments of crisis. He stopped in front of her with a distance in his stance that spoke louder than words, a distance that told her everything had changed. Catherine searched his face for any softness, any sign that the man she loved was still there beneath the anger. Instead, she saw suspicion, pain, and something even sharper, betrayal. His voice, low and measured, cut through the air like a blade. "You betrayed me," he said, each syllable carrying finality, as if he had already judged her guilty. The world seemed to tilt around her. Catherine tried to speak, to reach for him, to explain that the rumors he had heard were lies, that she had never given her heart to anyone but him. Her lips trembled as she whispered his name, but the words came out broken and uneven, falling uselessly to the floor between them. Alex turned his head slightly, as if even the sound of her voice was unbearable, his jaw clenched so tightly she thought it might shatter. The man who once promised to stand by her no matter what now looked at her as though she were a stranger. Her chest ached with the weight of words unsaid, but before she could gather her courage to speak again, Alex stepped back, his expression carved from stone. In his eyes she saw not only anger but also a trace of sorrow, a sorrow that suggested he wanted to believe her yet could not allow himself to. That conflict only deepened her despair because it meant there was love buried beneath the hurt, but it was being suffocated by mistrust. His silence was worse than any accusation, and when he finally turned to leave, his polished shoes striking against the marble floor, the sound echoed like the closing of a door that would never open again. Catherine remained frozen in place, her hands trembling at her sides, her throat raw from words she hadn't been able to force out. The cold air of the hospital wrapped around her like chains, and she sank against the wall, her heart splintering under the weight of his rejection. She wanted to chase after him, to make him listen, to prove that she was not what he thought she was. But her legs refused to move, her strength drained by the realization that he had already made his decision. For Alex, the man who once swore to love her endlessly, there was nothing left but betrayal. When the sound of his footsteps finally faded into silence, Catherine pressed her hand against her stomach, unaware in that moment of the life that had already begun within her. Tears blurred her vision as she slid to the floor, her sobs muffled by the empty hallway. She felt as though the future she had dreamed of had shattered in an instant, replaced by a darkness she didn't know how to escape. And though she couldn't see it then, this was not the end of her story but the beginning of a journey that would test her strength in ways she never imagined. Catherine left the hospital that night with her world torn apart and her spirit fractured in ways she could not yet comprehend. The city that had once felt alive with possibility now loomed over her like a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. She rented a small, dimly lit apartment on the far edge of town, a place where no one knew her name and no one asked questions. The walls were thin, the pipes rattled in the night, and the single window barely let in enough light to soften the gloom. Yet it was all she could afford, and within those walls she carried not only her own pain but also a secret that was growing inside her. The weeks stretched into months, and with each passing day the loneliness settled deeper into her bones. She worked whatever jobs she could find, washing dishes until her hands ached, cleaning offices when the rest of the city was asleep, serving coffee to people who never noticed her face. Every coin she earned she guarded fiercely, knowing she had to save for more than herself. Nights were the hardest, when the silence of the apartment reminded her of the love that had been ripped away. She would sit by the window with her hand resting protectively over her stomach, whispering promises to the child who had not yet been born. She told him that no matter how dark the world seemed, she would fight for him, that he would never feel unwanted, that her love would be enough even if no one else stood beside them. When Ethan came into the world, it was not in a gleaming hospital room surrounded by friends and family, but in a quiet clinic with tired nurses and the hum of an old heater that barely worked. Catherine cried as she held him for the first time, overwhelmed by the sight of his tiny fingers curling around hers. He had dark hair already, soft and fine, and when his eyes opened she gasped, because they were the unmistakable blue she had once loved in Alex. For a moment her chest clenched with pain, the memory of the man who had cast her aside crashing into the present. But then Ethan's little cry filled the room, and everything else faded. He was hers, entirely hers, and whatever resemblance he bore to his father did not change that. The years that followed were a battle of endurance. Catherine learned quickly that survival required sacrifice. There were days when she skipped meals so Ethan would have enough to eat, nights when she stayed awake sewing patches onto his clothes by the dim glow of a lamp that flickered with age. She worked herself to exhaustion, sometimes falling asleep at the kitchen table with unpaid bills spread around her, only to wake at the sound of her son's laughter in the morning. That laughter was her strength, the force that pushed her forward when her body wanted to collapse. Ethan grew quickly, his curiosity boundless, his spirit bright despite the hardships. He would tug at her hand in the market, asking questions about everything he saw, or sit on the floor with crayons, drawing pictures of houses with big windows and gardens they did not have but which he believed they would someday. Catherine marveled at his resilience, at the way he could find joy even in the smallest things. Yet every time she looked into his eyes, she was reminded of Alex, and the old wound bled quietly inside her. She tried to bury those thoughts, to focus only on the life she was building, but the shadow of the past never fully left her. Still, Catherine did not give up. She told Ethan stories at night, fairy tales where heroes always returned, where promises were never broken, where love was strong enough to overcome everything. She knew she was weaving dreams not only for him but for herself, fragile threads of hope to cover the cracks in her heart. 5 years passed in this rhythm of struggle and small victories, and though her body carried the weight of every sacrifice, she had grown stronger. She no longer thought of herself as the fragile girl Alex had walked away from in the hospital. She was a mother, fierce and unyielding, and her son was proof that even in the ashes of betrayal, something beautiful could be born. But deep down, beneath the walls she had built around her heart, Catherine feared one thing above all, that someday the truth of Ethan's eyes, so unmistakably like his father's, would call the past back to her door. The years shaped Catherine into someone far different from the woman who once stood trembling in a hospital corridor. Her days became defined by routine, by the rhythm of survival, by the quiet determination that she could not afford to falter when someone depended entirely on her. Ethan was 5 now, his small body full of restless energy, his laughter echoing through the modest apartment like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. He was everything she had left, everything she had built her fragile world around, and yet he was also a constant reminder of the man who had turned his back on her. Life without Alex was never easy, but Catherine had learned to live without expecting ease. She had grown used to waking before dawn, bundling Ethan into a sweater that had been mended too many times, and walking him to the small preschool down the street before heading to work. She held multiple jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning in the evenings, sometimes staying up late to sew clothes for neighbors just to earn a few extra bills. Her hands were always tired, her back always sore, yet when Ethan ran into her arms after school, pressing his face against her neck and giggling about some small adventure, she felt a strength that kept her moving. His happiness was her oxygen. Their apartment was small, no larger than a few rooms stacked together, but Catherine worked tirelessly to make it feel like home. She painted the walls a soft cream color when she could afford the paint, hung Ethan's drawings proudly like priceless art, and filled the shelves with second-hand books she bought at yard sales. Every corner bore the mark of her effort, a testament to her determination to give Ethan a life filled with love even if it lacked wealth. Still, in the quiet hours of night, when Ethan slept and she was left alone with her thoughts, the weight of solitude pressed heavily on her. She would sit by the window, staring out at the darkened streets, and wonder if Alex ever thought of her, if he ever wondered about the child he had unknowingly left behind. Those thoughts haunted her, though she despised herself for allowing them space in her heart. Ethan, innocent to the complexities of the past, often asked questions she struggled to answer. "Mommy, why don't I have a dad like the other kids at school?" His blue eyes would look up at her, so trusting, so wide with curiosity, and each time her chest tightened with the force of emotions she couldn't share with him. She would smile gently, stroke his dark hair, and say something vague, something like, "You have me, and that's all you need." But inside she feared the day he would press harder, the day she would have to reveal the truth about the man whose blood ran through his veins. She dreaded what Ethan would think of her choices, of the life she had built without his father. Despite the hardships, Catherine found joy in the simple things. She loved watching Ethan play in the park, his small legs carrying him across the grass with clumsy determination, his laughter blending with the sounds of other children. She loved the evenings when he would climb onto her lap with a book, insisting she read the same story for the 5th time, his head resting against her chest as he slowly drifted to sleep. In those moments she allowed herself to believe that love, even broken and battered as hers was, could still be enough to raise a child with warmth and hope. Yet no matter how hard she tried, the past remained a shadow she could not fully escape. Sometimes when she looked at Ethan, when his eyes caught the light in a certain way, it was as if Alex was staring back at her, unspoken words hanging between them. She would turn away quickly, burying her face in Ethan's hair, reminding herself that she had chosen this path and that she was strong enough to walk it. But the truth she feared most lingered always in the back of her mind. One day, fate might decide that her carefully built world of silence and secrets was not meant to last. And though she did not know it yet, that day was closer than she imagined. The afternoon had started like so many others, with Catherine taking Ethan to the park after a long day of work. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, painting the clouds with shades of orange and pink, and the sound of children's laughter carried through the air. Ethan darted ahead of her, his small legs pumping with excitement as he ran toward the swings, his dark hair ruffled by the breeze. Catherine followed at a slower pace, her eyes fixed on him with that blend of exhaustion and pride that only a parent truly understands. She carried with her a worn thermos of tea, the small comfort she allowed herself, and settled onto a bench where she could watch him. These hours in the park were her salvation, moments when the heaviness of life lifted just enough for her to breathe. She was sipping from the thermos when the sound of a familiar voice struck her like a sudden storm. The tone was deeper, perhaps a little older than the last time she had heard it, but unmistakable. Her heart lurched violently in her chest, and for a moment she could not bring herself to turn her head. It had been 5 years, years filled with loneliness, anger, and the determination never to look back, and yet here it was, the voice she had both dreaded and secretly longed for in her weakest moments. Slowly, almost against her will, her gaze shifted across the park, and her world tilted. Alex was standing only a few steps away, his tall frame impossible to mistake, his dark hair catching the last rays of sunlight, his sharp blue eyes scanning the area with the same intensity that had once both terrified and captivated her. He looked almost exactly as she remembered him, though time had etched subtle lines around his eyes, and there was a heaviness in his posture that suggested he carried burdens she could not see. Catherine's breath caught in her throat, and her hands tightened around the thermos as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. She had imagined this moment in nightmares and daydreams alike, but never had she truly believed it would happen. It was Ethan who drew Alex's attention. The boy had climbed onto the swing and was pumping his legs clumsily, his laughter ringing out across the park. Alex's gaze froze on him, and Catherine saw the moment recognition struck. His entire body seemed to stiffen, his expression shifting from casual curiosity to stunned disbelief. He stared as though he were seeing a ghost, his blue eyes widening, his lips parting with the sharp intake of breath. Catherine felt panic rise within her, every instinct screaming at her to gather Ethan and run, to shield him from the truth she had fought so hard to keep hidden. But her legs refused to move, her body rooted in place by the weight of inevitability. Alex took a step forward, then another, his eyes never leaving Ethan. Catherine rose quickly from the bench, intercepting him before he could get too close. Her voice was low and sharp when she spoke, though her heart hammered in her chest. "Stay away," she said, but even as the words left her mouth she knew they were powerless. The resemblance was undeniable. Ethan's blue eyes, his dark hair, the curve of his smile, Alex had no need of her confirmation. The truth stood before him on the swing set. For a long moment the two of them simply stared at one another, the years collapsing between them like paper walls. Catherine saw shock written across Alex's face, but beneath it she saw something deeper, something raw and painful. He looked at Ethan as though the world had shifted beneath his feet, as though every certainty he had clung to for the past 5 years had been ripped away in a single instant. Catherine's stomach twisted because she knew what was coming. Alex's voice, when it finally emerged, was hoarse, almost broken. "He's mine, isn't he?" The question was barely more than a whisper, but it sliced through her like a blade. Catherine's lips trembled, and for a moment she considered lying, considered protecting the fragile life she had built by denying what was already obvious. But she couldn't. She had lived too long with the weight of secrets, too long with the shadow of his absence haunting every corner of their lives. Slowly, with a steadiness she did not feel, she looked into his eyes and gave the truth the voice it had been denied. "Yes. He's your son." Alex staggered back as though the words had struck him physically. His hand lifted to his mouth, his chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. Catherine wanted to hate him in that moment, wanted to cling to the fury she had nursed for years, but all she saw was a man confronted by the reality of what he had lost. The air between them was thick with everything unspoken, with accusations and regrets, with grief and longing, and Catherine felt her knees weaken beneath the weight of it. She turned quickly toward the swing set, calling Ethan's name, her voice cracking as she beckoned him to her side. The boy came running, oblivious to the storm around him, his smile bright, his little hand slipping easily into hers. As Catherine guided him away from the park, she could feel Alex's eyes on them, burning into her back with a mixture of shock, pain, and something she could not yet name. She told herself she would not look back, that she would not let him shatter the fragile peace she had fought for. But as she walked away, Ethan laughing beside her, Catherine knew with a sinking certainty that the past she had tried to bury had found its way back, and nothing would ever be the same again. Alex could not escape the image of the boy's face. That night he lay awake in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling while the city pulsed with neon lights far below, and every time he closed his eyes he saw those startling blue eyes looking back at him, his own eyes reflected in the face of a child. He had always prided himself on being logical, controlled, a man who made decisions based on facts rather than feelings, but now all of that discipline crumbled beneath the weight of a truth he could no longer deny. The boy in the park was his son. No rumor, no denial, no carefully built wall of anger could erase that reality. The revelation left him shaken, not only because he had been wrong about Catherine but because for 5 years he had missed moments that could never be reclaimed. The first words, the first steps, the countless nights when his son had reached for comfort and he had not been there. The thought hollowed him out and filled him with a rage not at Catherine but at himself. The next day he sought her out. He found her leaving the small preschool where Ethan studied, her hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder as they walked. She stopped abruptly when she saw him standing at the edge of the sidewalk, her body tensing as though preparing for battle. Alex noticed how quickly she pulled Ethan closer, as if to shield him from harm, and the sight pierced him. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace, his voice low and steady though every part of him trembled inside. He said he only wanted to talk, only wanted to understand, and Catherine's eyes burned with suspicion as she told Ethan to run ahead to the apartment. The boy hesitated, glancing curiously at Alex, but obeyed his mother, leaving the two of them standing in a silence so heavy it threatened to crush them both. Catherine's voice was sharp when she finally spoke. She told him he had no right to be there, that he had forfeited any claim to her or to Ethan the moment he turned his back on her in the hospital. Her words stung like lashes, and Alex let them, because he knew she deserved to hurl every piece of her pain at him. He tried to explain, to tell her that he had been blinded by lies and his own fear, that he had believed she had betrayed him because his world at that time was filled with people waiting to deceive him. He admitted that he had chosen the coward's path, running rather than staying, punishing her for something she had never done. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, though she quickly blinked them away, and her voice trembled with fury as she told him that his choices had left her alone with a child, that she had endured years of struggle without his help, and that no apology could erase the scars of those nights when she thought she had nothing left to give. Alex listened, every word striking him with brutal force, but instead of defending himself he nodded. He told her he did not expect forgiveness, that he knew he could not rewrite the past, but he wanted a chance to prove himself now. He said Ethan deserved more than a broken family and a father who had abandoned him out of pride. He said he had missed enough and would not miss another day if he could help it. Catherine's expression hardened, and she told him that Ethan was her world, that she would not let him waltz in and tear apart the fragile stability she had built. Her words were like a fortress wall, and Alex realized that winning her trust would not come from arguments or promises but from actions, from time, from showing her and their son that he was not the man who had once walked away. That night Catherine sat at their small table in the apartment after Ethan had gone to bed, her head in her hands as memories flooded her. She remembered the cold look in Alex's eyes when he accused her of betrayal, the way her world collapsed when he turned his back. She told herself she could not trust him again, that she had to protect Ethan above all else. Yet a part of her, the part that had watched Alex's face in the park when he first saw their son, could not deny the truth. He had looked at Ethan not with arrogance or calculation, but with awe, sorrow, and desperate love. That expression haunted her almost as much as his betrayal. Alex, in the meantime, began to change his life. He rescheduled meetings, delegated responsibilities he had once guarded fiercely, and carved out time each day to be near Catherine and Ethan. At first Catherine refused to let him close, but Ethan, innocent and eager, was drawn to him. He asked questions about the man with the same eyes, laughed at his stories, clung to his hand when he offered to walk him home. Every time Catherine watched them together, her chest tightened with conflict. She wanted to protect her son, but she also saw how Ethan glowed in his father's presence, how natural their bond seemed, and it scared her. In the quiet of her nights, Catherine wrestled with her heart. She did not know if she could ever forgive Alex, but she could not deny that her son needed him. And as much as she tried to bury it, she also felt the stirrings of something she thought had died long ago, the possibility that love, once broken and lost, might still find a way to return. The hospital corridors once again became part of Catherine's world, though this time she was not the patient but the mother of one. Ethan had fallen ill with a sudden and frightening condition that left his small body weak, his once bright laughter replaced with fevered cries. The doctors spoke in hushed tones, their eyes serious as they explained the need for urgent surgery. Catherine sat in the sterile consultation room, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the pen they gave her to sign the paperwork. Memories of the past came rushing back, of the last time her life had unraveled in a hospital, of Alex's words and the weight of abandonment, and she felt herself breaking all over again. This time, however, when she lifted her eyes in despair, Alex was sitting across from her, his face pale, his jaw clenched, his hand steady as he reached across the table to take hers in his own. For a moment she wanted to pull away, still unsure if she could trust him, but his grip was firm, not demanding, simply anchoring her to the present. He spoke with determination, telling her that he would cover every cost, that nothing mattered more than Ethan's recovery, that no power on earth would keep him from protecting their son. Catherine could hardly breathe under the flood of fear, but there was something in his voice, a rawness she had not heard before, that quieted the storm inside her just enough to let her nod. Together they walked into Ethan's room, where the boy lay with tubes connected to his small body, his skin too pale for a child so full of life. Catherine sat on one side of the bed, stroking his hair and whispering promises that he would be all right, while Alex lowered himself into the chair on the other side, his large hand gently enveloping Ethan's tiny fingers. Hours stretched endlessly as they waited for the operation to begin. Catherine watched Alex in those moments, the way he sat unmoving, his eyes fixed on Ethan's face, his lips moving in silent prayers she had never known him capable of. She remembered the man who once accused her, who turned away without hearing her pleas, and she compared him to the man before her now, broken, terrified, but unwavering in his devotion. When the nurses finally came to wheel Ethan into surgery, Catherine's body trembled with the urge to collapse, but Alex caught her before she fell, holding her tightly in his arms. For the first time in years she did not fight the comfort he offered, because the weight of fear was too heavy to bear alone. The waiting room became their prison. Minutes bled into hours, every second clawing at Catherine's sanity. She paced the length of the floor until her legs ached, then sat and buried her face in her hands, only to rise again moments later. Alex remained by her side the entire time. He did not try to silence her sobs or offer hollow reassurances, but he stayed, unyielding, his presence a constant reminder that she was no longer carrying this burden alone. At one point, when her breathing grew ragged, he knelt in front of her and spoke quietly, his voice shaking as he admitted his deepest regret. He told her that leaving her years ago had been the worst mistake of his life, that he had punished himself every day since, but that nothing compared to the thought of losing the son he had only just begun to know. His confession broke something inside her, not because it erased the past, but because she saw in his eyes that he truly meant every word. When the surgeon finally emerged, exhaustion etched into his face, Catherine gripped Alex's arms so tightly her nails dug into his skin. The words they had been waiting for came like a blessing. The operation had been successful, and Ethan would recover. Catherine let out a sob that shook her whole body, collapsing against Alex's chest as tears of relief streamed down her face. Alex held her, his own eyes wet, his arms wrapping around her with a fierce protectiveness. In that moment there were no accusations, no past betrayals, no walls between them. There was only the shared joy of knowing their son would live. Later, when they were finally allowed back into Ethan's room, Catherine sat at his bedside, holding his small hand as he slept peacefully, the color slowly returning to his cheeks. She looked up and saw Alex standing on the other side of the bed, his hand brushing gently against Ethan's hair, his expression soft and filled with a love that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Their eyes met across their son's sleeping form, and for the first time in years Catherine did not see the man who had hurt her. She saw the man who had stayed through the longest night of her life, the father who had proven with actions rather than words that he would not abandon them again. Something inside her shifted quietly, a fragile but undeniable crack in the armor she had built around her heart. It did not mean forgiveness had fully come, but it meant the possibility of it existed. She realized that love, though once shattered, could be rebuilt piece by piece when two people chose to fight for it. And as she sat there with Alex, their hands resting side by side on Ethan's blanket, Catherine allowed herself to imagine, perhaps for the first time, that a future together was not only possible but waiting to be claimed. When Ethan finally returned home from the hospital, the apartment felt transformed, not because its walls were any brighter or its furniture any less worn, but because life had been restored to it. Catherine moved through the rooms with a lightness she had not felt in years, carrying her son from bed to couch and back again as he slowly regained his strength, his laughter growing louder each day. Alex was there constantly, not as a guest but as if he belonged, carrying groceries, cooking meals in the small kitchen even though he had never cooked for himself before, and learning the rhythm of their modest life with humility and patience. Catherine watched him with cautious eyes, waiting for the illusion to break, for him to remember the wealth and power that had once made him untouchable. But instead of grand gestures, he offered simple acts, changing sheets, fixing a broken chair, reading bedtime stories in a voice so soft it surprised her. It was in those everyday moments that Catherine began to see the depth of his transformation. The man who once valued control and perfection above all else now knelt on the floor with crayons, drawing messy castles with Ethan, his expensive shirt sleeves smudged with colors. He no longer seemed like the cold figure who had judged her years ago, he looked instead like a man stripped of his armor, vulnerable and desperate to hold on to the second chance fate had given him. Catherine struggled with conflicting emotions, torn between the memories of betrayal and the undeniable evidence of the man he had become. She would catch herself smiling when she heard Ethan's laughter echoing through the apartment as Alex chased him playfully, and then she would quickly look away, reminding herself not to surrender too easily. But deep down she knew her heart was softening, no matter how fiercely she tried to guard it. One evening, long after Ethan had gone to bed, the two of them sat together in the small living room, the silence between them charged with unspoken words. Catherine stared at the flickering lamp, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Alex leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on her as if searching for a door that had been locked for too long. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice low but steady. He told her that he had spent 5 years convincing himself he had been right, that he had buried his guilt under layers of anger, but the moment he saw Ethan in the park, everything shattered. He admitted that his success, his wealth, all the power he had clung to had meant nothing compared to the life he had thrown away. With each word, Catherine felt her defenses weakening, because she could hear the sincerity in his tone, see the rawness in his eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but sharp. She told him that words alone could not heal what had been broken, that love was not something to be declared but to be lived, day after day. She reminded him of the nights she had gone hungry to feed their son, of the moments when she had nearly collapsed under the weight of being both mother and father, and how he had not been there. Tears welled in her eyes as she confessed that she was terrified of letting him in, terrified of letting Ethan grow to love him only to be abandoned again. Her honesty cut through the air like glass, and for a moment Alex had no response. Then he stood, walked to her, and knelt at her feet. He took her hands gently in his eyes glistening with tears of his own, and promised her not perfection, not grand vows, but presence. He told her that he would be there for every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every small victory and setback. He swore that he would not walk away again, not because it was easy, but because they were his family and nothing mattered more. Catherine looked down at him, seeing not the millionaire, not the powerful CEO, but the man who had stayed awake in a hospital waiting room, the man who had held their son's hand through pain, the man who was now willing to kneel on a worn carpet in a modest apartment just to prove his love. Something inside her broke open, not with the sharpness of old wounds but with the warmth of healing. Slowly, she lifted his face so their eyes met, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to whisper the truth she had buried. She told him she still loved him, that love had never truly died, only hidden beneath layers of hurt, and that maybe it was time to let it breathe again. The days that followed felt different. There were still arguments, moments when old pain resurfaced, but now there was also laughter shared between the three of them, dinners eaten together, bedtime stories read as a family. Catherine found herself leaning against Alex without thinking, smiling when his arms slipped naturally around her shoulders. Ethan, sensing the change even if he didn't fully understand it, glowed with happiness, clinging to both of them as though he had always known this was the way life was meant to be. Months later, Alex asked Catherine to marry him again. It was not in a grand ballroom or on a distant island, but in their small apartment, late at night, with Ethan asleep in the next room. He held a simple ring in his hand, his voice trembling as he said he wanted to build a life with her, not the life they had once dreamed of, but a new one, stronger because it had been forged through trials. Catherine's heart pounded as tears filled her eyes, and though fear still lingered, she found herself nodding, not because she had forgotten the past, but because she believed in the future they could build. Their wedding was quiet and intimate, held in a small garden where Ethan proudly carried the rings and Catherine walked toward Alex in a simple white dress that fluttered in the breeze. When they exchanged vows, there were no promises of perfection, only of choosing each other every day, of never letting pride or fear come between them again. As Alex kissed her, Catherine felt years of pain fall away, replaced with the certainty that she had not only survived but found her way to joy. Ethan laughed as they pulled him into their arms, and in that moment, under the golden light of the setting sun, Catherine knew that their story, once marked by betrayal and heartbreak, had finally become one of forgiveness, healing, and love that was strong enough to last forever.